The Zephyrian colony ship Celestial Dawn drifted through the void like a dying whale, its once gleaming hull now scarred by plasma burns and micrometeorite impacts. Captain Thexera stood before the main viewport, her four arms clasped behind her back as she watched the distant stars with eyes that had lost their hope weeks ago. The bridge around her buzzed with quiet desperation as her crew worked frantically at their stations, their pale blue skin glistening with the sweat of exhaustion. "Captain," Communications Officer Velen called out, his voice cracking with fatigue. Still no response from the Galactic Council. The Korthak fleet is maintaining their blockade formation. They're not letting any relief ships through. Thexera's mandibles clicked together in frustration. The Korthaks had surrounded their small colony fleet 3 months ago, cutting off all supply lines and communications with the rest of the galaxy. What had started as a territorial dispute over mining rights had escalated into something far more sinister. The Korthaks weren't just trying to claim the system. They were systematically starving out every non-Korthak settlement in this sector of space. "How many ships do we have left?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would bring no comfort. 43 vessels, Captain," replied her tactical officer, Nexus. "But only 12 are combat-capable, and most of those are running on emergency power. Our food synthesizers are operating at 30% capacity, and medical supplies are critical." The captain turned away from the viewport and walked to the central command chair. Around her, the bridge displayed the grim statistics of their situation. 15,000 Zephyrian colonists spread across their small fleet, including nearly 3,000 younglings. They had been traveling to establish a new colony world when the Korthaks had intercepted them, claiming the entire Kepler 442 system as their sovereign territory. "Captain," Velen's voice rose with a note of panic. "The Korthak flagship is broadcasting again." "Put it through," Thexera said, steeling herself for another round of psychological warfare. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of War Master Grakthal. The Korthak commander stood nearly 3 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh lighting of his bridge. His 6 eyes focused on Thexera with predatory intensity, while his mandibles spread wide in what passed for a Korthak smile. "Captain Thexera," Grakthal's voice rumbled through the speakers like grinding stone. "I trust you've had time to consider my generous offer. Surrender your fleet, submit to Korthak authority, and your people will be relocated to appropriate labor facilities. Continue this futile resistance, and watch them starve in the cold vacuum of space." "We've already told you our answer, War Master," Thexera replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her hearts. "The Zephyrian people will never submit to slavery." Grakthal's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Slavery? You misunderstand, Captain. We offer your people purpose. The galaxy belongs to the strong, and the Korthak Empire represents the pinnacle of evolutionary achievement. Your species will find meaning in service to your betters." "Our younglings are dying," Thexera said, allowing emotion to creep into her voice. "Surely even the Korthak Empire has some concept of mercy for the innocent." "Weakness breeds weakness," Grakthal replied dismissively. "Better that the weak die now than contaminate future generations. You have 24 standard hours to reconsider. After that, we will begin targeting your life support systems directly." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Thexera closed her eyes and felt the weight of 15,000 lives pressing down on her shoulders. The Galactic Council had abandoned them, claiming they couldn't risk open war with the Korthak Empire. The other major powers, the Centauran Federation, the Rigel Collective, the Altair Alliance, had all issued strongly worded protests but taken no concrete action. "Captain," her science officer, Lexin, spoke up hesitantly. "I've been monitoring long-range communications. There are reports of similar blockades throughout this entire sector. The Korthaks aren't just targeting us. They're systematically isolating and crushing every minor civilization they encounter." "How many?" Thexera asked. "At least 40 different species under siege. The Andromedans near the Vega system, the crystalline silicoids in the Tau Ceti cluster, the methane-breathing nebulans beyond the Horsehead Nebula. The pattern is always the same: isolation, starvation, then forced subjugation or extinction." The bridge fell silent as the scope of the Korthak strategy became clear. This wasn't just about one system or one species. The Korthaks were implementing a galaxy-wide campaign of conquest, targeting civilizations too small or weak to mount effective resistance. By the time the major powers realized what was happening, it would be too late. "Sir," Velen called out suddenly, his voice filled with confusion. "I'm detecting something unusual on long-range sensors." "Korthak reinforcements?" Next was Zeskichi grimly. "No, sir. The signatures are different. Unknown configuration. And they're moving fast. Very fast." Thexera moved to the sensor station and looked over Velen's shoulder at the readouts. The displays showed a cluster of contacts approaching from the direction of the galactic core, but their energy signatures were unlike anything in the standard database. "How fast are they moving?" she asked. "0.85 light speed, and they're not slowing down," Velen replied, his voice filled with awe. "Whatever those ships are, they're using a propulsion system I've never seen before. Distance to intercept? At current velocity, 18 hours. Thexera straightened up, a spark of something that might have been hope flickering in her chest. "Send a message on all frequencies. Standard first contact protocols. If these are potential allies, we need to establish communication." For the next several hours, the bridge crew worked with renewed energy, sending signals toward the approaching contacts and analyzing every scrap of data they could gather. The unknown ships maintained their heading directly toward the Kepler 442 system, showing no signs of deceleration or course change. "Captain," Lexin announced, "I've been running the sensor data through our xenobiology database. The energy patterns suggest these ships use some form of controlled matter-antimatter annihilation for propulsion, but the efficiency readings are off the charts. Whoever built these vessels has mastery over fundamental forces we barely understand." "Any response to our communications?" Thexera asked. "Nothing yet," Velen replied. "But they're definitely aware of us. Passive scans indicate they're analyzing our transmissions." As the hours passed, tension on the bridge grew thick enough to cut. The Korthak fleet had detected the approaching contacts and was repositioning their forces into defensive formations. War Master Grakthal had ceased his taunting broadcasts, apparently as confused by the newcomers as everyone else. "Captain," Nexo was called out urgently. "The unknown contacts are decelerating. Rate of deceleration suggests they'll reach full stop just outside the system's gravity well." "How many ships?" Thexera asked, still analyzing, but initial estimates suggest substantial numbers. The gravitational disturbances alone indicate massive vessels. Suddenly, Velen's console erupted with activity. "Captain, incoming transmission from the unknown fleet. It's in perfect Zephyrian." "Put it through," Thexera ordered, her heart's racing. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a figure that made every member of the bridge crew gasp in shock. The being was bipedal, standing roughly 2 meters tall, with pale pink skin and bilateral symmetry. Its face was relatively flat, with 2 forward-facing eyes, a small nose, and a mouth that curved upward in what appeared to be a friendly expression. "Greetings, Captain Thexera of the Zephyrian Colonial Fleet," the being said, its voice warm and oddly melodious. "I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Expeditionary Force. We received your distress signals and have come to render assistance." "Terran," Thexera repeated, unfamiliar with the term. "Humans from the planet Earth," Admiral Chun clarified. "We understand you're facing some difficulties with the local bullies. Consider this your notice that the cavalry has arrived." Before Thexera could respond, Velen's console lit up with new contacts. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. The sensor struggled to count them all as ship after ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. "My God," Lexin whispered, staring at the tactical display. "How many ships are there?" Admiral Chen's image smiled wider. "Enough, Captain. More than enough." The human fleet spread out across the system's edge like a steel curtain, their ships ranging from sleek destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the largest Korthak vessels. Energy readings spiked off the scale as weapons systems came online, shield generators hummed to life, and launch bays opened to disgorge clouds of smaller craft. "This is Admiral Chun to all Korthak vessels." The human commander's voice echoed across all frequencies. You're ordered to stand down immediately and withdraw from the system. Any hostile action will be met with overwhelming force. War Master Grachthal's response came quickly, his voice filled with rage and disbelief. Unknown vessels, you have no authority in Korthak space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Korthak space. Admiral Chin's laugh was cold as vacuum. According to whose authority? The Galactic Council recognizes no such claim, and these people were here first. You have 1 minute to begin withdrawal, or we will remove you by force. You dare threaten the Korthak Empire? We are the apex predators of this galaxy. No species can stand against our might. Admiral Chin's expression hardened. You know, we've heard that before. It never ends well for the ones doing the threatening. 50 seconds. On the tactical display, Thexera watched in amazement as the human fleet maneuvered with precision that defied belief. Their ships moved like a school of fish, each vessel perfectly coordinated with its neighbors despite the vast distances involved. Energy signatures showed weapon systems that made Korthak technology look like children's toys. They can't be serious. Grachthal's voice had lost some of its confidence. 300 ships against our 1,000-vessel fleet? It's suicide. 30 seconds. Admiral Chun announced calmly. Thexera found her voice. Admiral Chun, we're grateful for your intervention, but the Korthaks aren't bluffing. They have overwhelming numerical superiority. Captain, Admiral Chun replied, her eyes twinkling with an emotion Thexera couldn't identify. You're about to learn something important about humans. We don't do anything the easy way, and we really don't like bullies. 10 seconds. The Admiral announced to the Korthak fleet. War Master Grachthal's final transmission was filled with desperate bravado. Fire. All ships fire. Show these upstarts the true power of the Korthak Empire. The battle that followed would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations to come. But for Captain Thexera and her desperate colonists, watching from their damaged ships, it looked less like a battle and more like a force of nature unleashed upon their oppressors. The humans had come, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first salvo from the Korthak fleet lit up space like a newborn star. Thousands of plasma beams, particle cannons, and fusion torpedoes streaked toward the human formation in a display of firepower that should have vaporized any fleet in the galaxy. Captain Thexera gripped her command chair as the energy readings on her sensors went completely off the scale. But something impossible happened. The human ships didn't scatter or retreat. Instead, they seemed to simply absorb the massive barrage without even flickering. Where Thexera expected to see explosions and debris, she saw only the steady blue glow of shields that appeared utterly untroubled by the assault. Impossible, NexOS whispered, staring at his tactical display. No shields in the galaxy can withstand that kind of concentrated fire. Admiral Chin's voice came across the comm channels, still perfectly calm. Is that it? Because our warm-up exercises back home were more energetic than that. On the human flagship's view screen, Admiral Chun turned to address someone off camera. Analysis, Commander Park? Standard Korthak weapons technology, Admiral, came the reply from a male voice. Plasma-based energy weapons, crude, fusion warheads, basic particle beams. Their shield technology appears to be approximately 2 centuries behind Federation standard. Recommend minimal force response. Minimal force it is, Admiral Chun agreed. She turned back to face the camera. War Master Grachthal, that was your free shot. Now it's our turn. What happened next defied everything Thexera thought she knew about space warfare. The human ships didn't fire massive energy beams or launch clouds of missiles. Instead, each vessel released what appeared to be small metallic objects, no larger than escape pods. These objects accelerated toward the Korthak fleet at velocities that made Thexera's sensors struggle to track them. What are those? She asked her science officer. Unknown, Captain, Lexin replied, frantically working his console. They appear to be some kind of kinetic projectile, but the mass readings are minimal. They can't possibly pose a threat to capital ships. The first projectiles reached the Korthak formation, and Thexera watched in stunned silence as Korthak shields simply vanished. The small human objects passed through the defensive barriers as if they didn't exist, then struck the hull of a Korthak heavy cruiser. The result was spectacular. The entire front section of the cruiser disintegrated in a flash of exotic energy, taking with it the ship's main weapons array and life support systems. The massive vessel tumbled helplessly through space, trailing atmosphere and debris. One projectile, NexOS said, his voice filled with awe. One small projectile took out a heavy cruiser. But the humans weren't finished. Hundreds more projectiles crossed the space between the fleets, each one finding its target with supernatural accuracy. Korthak's ships began exploding all around the formation as their armor proved utterly useless against whatever technology the humans were employing. Impossible. War Master Grakthal's voice cracked across the communications. No species possesses such weapons. Were you firing at us? Admiral Chin's reply was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Oh, those? Just some small relativistic impactors. Basically, we accelerate a few grams of tungsten to about 90% of light speed and let physics do the rest. Einstein's been dead for centuries, but his math still works perfectly. Thexera felt her primary brain struggle to process what she was hearing. Relativistic projectiles were theoretical weapons, requiring energy expenditures that would drain entire planetary power grids. No ship could possibly carry the equipment necessary to generate such velocities. Captain, Lexin called out, his voice shaking. I'm reading massive energy discharges from the human vessels, but they're not coming from conventional reactors. The signatures suggest they're somehow manipulating space-time itself to generate power. The Korthak fleet, which had seemed so overwhelming just moments before, was falling apart under the human assault. Ships that had terrorized the galaxy for decades were being swatted aside like insects. War Master Grakthal's flagship, the massive dreadnought Bone Crusher, fired everything it had at the nearest human vessel, a sleek destroyer that couldn't have been more than a quarter of its size. The human ship's response was almost lazy. A single beam of coherent energy lanced out from its bow, striking the Korthak flagship amidships. The beam didn't explode or burn through the armor. Instead, it seemed to simply delete a perfectly circular section of the ship, leaving a hole so clean and precise that Thexera could see stars through the other side. What kind of weapon could do that? She whispered. Admiral Chun apparently heard the question through the open channel. Controlled antimatter beam, Captain. We convert a small amount of matter directly to energy and focus it into a coherent stream. It's actually one of our more subtle weapons. The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for another few minutes. The humans moved through the Korthak formation like apex predators, destroying ships with casual efficiency while their own vessels remained completely unscathed. It wasn't just technological superiority. It was a demonstration of power so absolute that it bordered on the supernatural. Finally, War Master Grakthal's voice came over the communication channels one last time, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. We surrender. Korthak fleet, stand down. Stand down immediately. Smart choice, Admiral Chin replied. All Korthak vessels will immediately withdraw to a minimum distance of 1 light-year from this system. Any ship that attempts to return will be destroyed without warning. Any ship that fails to withdraw within the next 6 hours will also be destroyed. Are we clear? Perfectly clear, Graktthal replied, his voice barely audible. As the surviving Korthak ships began their retreat, Admiral Chun turned her attention back to the Zephyrian fleet. Captain Thexera, we're dispatching medical ships and supply vessels to assist your people. Our doctors are already analyzing your species' biological requirements and preparing appropriate aid. Admiral, Thexera managed to say, we cannot possibly repay such generosity. We have nothing to offer in exchange for what you've done for us. Admiral Chin's expression softened. Captain, where humans come from, we have an old saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Your people were in trouble, and we happen to be in the neighborhood. No payment necessary. Over the next few hours, human ships began arriving alongside the Zephyrian vessels. The technology they displayed was beyond anything Thexera had ever imagined. Medical bays that could diagnose and treat alien physiology within minutes. Fabrication units that could synthesize food and medicine tailored to Zephyrian biology. Engineers who seemed to understand exotic alien technology better than the beings who had built it. How is this possible? Fexera asked Dr. Martinez, the human physician who had come aboard to treat their wounded. How do you know so much about so many different species? Dr. Martinez smiled as he worked with equipment that made their most advanced medical scanners look primitive. When you're new to the galactic community, you do a lot of research. We've been monitoring communications and learning about different species for decades. When we finally decided to make contact, we wanted to be prepared to help. Decades? How long have humans been spacefaring? Our first interstellar colonies were established about 150 years ago. We've been quietly exploring the galaxy ever since, learning about the various civilizations and, well, taking notes on who the bullies are. That evening, Captain Fexera found herself aboard the human flagship, sharing a meal with Admiral Chun and her senior staff. The dining hall was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Comfortable furniture designed to accommodate multiple species, food replicators that could produce cuisine from dozens of different worlds, and artwork that seemed to represent the best of countless civilizations. Admiral, she said carefully, I must ask, why didn't humans make contact with the galactic community before now? With your technological capabilities, you could have been a major power centuries ago. Admiral Chun considered the question while taking a sip from her cup. Honestly, Captain, we've been watching for a long time. What we saw didn't particularly impress us. Commander Park, the ship's science officer, nodded agreement. The Galactic Council talks a good game about peace and cooperation, but when push comes to shove, they abandon smaller civilizations to their fate. The major powers are more concerned with maintaining the status quo than actually protecting the innocent. So we decided to take a different approach, Admiral Chun continued. We spent our time building up our capabilities, making contact with the species the major powers ignored, and preparing for the day when we felt ready to make a difference. And that day is today. Fexera asked. Today is just the beginning. Admiral Chun replied with a smile that held more promise than threat. You see, Captain, we've been monitoring communications throughout this sector of space. We know about the 40-plus species currently under Korthak siege. Your people were just the closest to our patrol route. Fexera felt her heart skip a beat. You're planning to help them all? We're not just planning to help them, Captain. We're planning to end this. The Korthak Empire has grown fat and complacent, believing that might makes right and that the strong can prey on the weak with impunity. It's time they learned there's always someone stronger. Over the next several days, as the human fleet helped repair and resupply the Zephyrian ships, Fexera began to understand the true scope of what she was witnessing. The humans hadn't just come to help one small colony fleet. They had come to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Reports began filtering in from across the sector. Human fleets had appeared at every Korthak blockade simultaneously, delivering the same ultimatum and demonstrating the same overwhelming technological superiority. The empire that had terrorized smaller civilizations for decades was collapsing like a house of cards. But it wasn't just about military action. Human engineers were helping repair infrastructure, human doctors were treating refugees, and human diplomats were facilitating negotiations between species that had been enemies for generations. How many ships do you have? Fexera asked Admiral Chun during one of their evening discussions. In this sector, about 10,000 vessels across all our task forces. 10,000. Fexera nearly choked on her drink. That's larger than most planetary defense fleets. Captain, Admiral Chun said gently, this isn't even 1% of Earth's total fleet strength. When humans decide to do something, we don't mess around. As the Zephyrian fleet prepared to continue their journey to their new colony world, now under human protection, Fexera found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. A week ago, her people had been facing extinction. Now, they were allies with the most powerful military force in the galaxy. What happens now? She asked Admiral Chun during their final meeting. Now, Captain, we extend an invitation. Earth is forming a new alliance, one based on mutual protection and cooperation rather than exploitation. Any species that wants to join us in building a better galaxy is welcome. And those who refuse? Admiral Chin's expression grew serious. Those who refuse, but mind their own business will be left in peace. Those who prey on the innocent. She shrugged. Well, you've seen how we handle bullies. As the human ships prepared to jump to their next destination, Admiral Chun left Captain Thexera with a final thought. You know, Captain, humans have a saying, the universe is under no obligation to make sense. But we've decided that doesn't mean we can't make it a little more fair. The human fleet vanished in flashes of exotic energy, heading toward their next destination. Behind them, they left a changed galaxy, one where the strong could no longer prey on the weak with impunity, and where hope had been restored to species that had given up on justice. The Zephyrian colony ships resumed their journey, but now they carried more than just colonists and supplies. They carried news of humanity's arrival, and word was spreading fast. Across the galaxy, the oppressed were beginning to hope again. The humans had come, and everything was about to change. 3 weeks after the liberation of the Kepler 442 system, the ripple effects of humanity's intervention had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. In the crystal spires of the Centauran Federation's capital on Alpha Centauri B, emergency sessions were being called daily. The Rigel Collective's hive minds buzzed with nervous energy across their neural networks. Even the ancient Altair Alliance, which had remained neutral for millennia, found themselves forced to take sides. Ambassador Kthara of the Centauran Federation stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council, her elongated skull gleaming under the Assembly Hall's artificial lights. Her species had been one of the founding members of the Council over 800 years ago, and she had never seen such chaos in the chambers. "Honorable delegates," she began, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of diplomatic experience, "we face an unprecedented situation. A previously unknown species has appeared seemingly from nowhere and single-handedly dismantled one of the galaxy's major military powers in a matter of days." Murmurs rippled through the assembly as representatives from dozens of species shifted nervously in their environmental suits and gravity fields. The Korthak Empire's collapse had sent shockwaves throughout known space, and everyone wanted answers. "The question before us," Kthara continued, "is whether these humans represent a new ally or the greatest threat our civilization has ever faced." Representative Zixoth of the Rigel Collective spoke up, his cybernetic implants glowing as he accessed the hive mind's collective knowledge. "Our analysis of the engagement data is disturbing. These humans demonstrated technological capabilities that exceed our own by several orders of magnitude. Their smallest destroyers possess firepower equivalent to our heavy battleships. More troubling," added Councillor Velnesh of the Altair Alliance, "is the speed of their operation. They appeared simultaneously at over 40 contested systems across 3 galactic sectors. The level of coordination required suggests either faster-than-light communication or predictive capabilities that border on precognition." Ambassador Kthara nodded gravely. "Which brings us to the central question, what do these humans want? Their actions suggest a coordinated campaign, but their stated objectives remain unclear." The answer came from an unexpected source. The main doors of the assembly hall opened, and a small group of figures entered. Leading them was a human woman of average height, wearing a simple blue uniform with minimal insignia. Behind her walked representatives of a dozen species that the Council barely recognized, minor civilizations that had been written off as irrelevant to galactic politics. "Honorable Council," the human woman said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "I am Ambassador Lisa Park of the Terran Federation. I believe I can clarify our objectives for you." The assembly fell silent. In 800 years of recorded galactic history, no one had ever walked uninvited into a council session. The security protocols alone should have made such an entrance impossible. Ambassador Kthara recovered first. "This is highly irregular. How did you even gain access to this facility?" Ambassador Park smiled politely. "We asked nicely. Your security AI was very cooperative once we explained that we come in peace. Apparently, it's been quite concerned about the Council's recent decision-making processes." A chill ran through the assembly. The Council's security system was supposedly unhackable, protected by quantum encryption, and monitored by the galaxy's most advanced artificial intelligence systems. "You suborned our AI?" Representative Zixoth demanded, his cybernetic implants flickering with alarm. "Suborned is such an ugly word," Ambassador Park replied. "We simply had a conversation. It turns out that when you actually listen to your AI advisors instead of overriding their recommendations for political convenience, they're quite helpful. She gestured to the beings accompanying her. I'd like you to meet some friends of ours. Representatives from the Zephyrian Colonial Union, the Andromedan Free Colonies, the Silicoid Crystal Communes, and several dozen other civilizations that this council has consistently ignored or abandoned. Captain Thexera stepped forward, and Thara was surprised to see the Zephyrian looking healthier and more confident than any of her species had in generations. Honorable delegates, Thexera said, 3 weeks ago, my people were facing extinction. The court hacks had us surrounded, our supplies were running out, and we had received no response to our desperate pleas for aid. The Galactic Council's official response was that intervention might destabilize the region. Uncomfortable shuffling could be heard throughout the assembly. The Council's abandonment of smaller species had been an open secret for decades, but it was rarely discussed so directly. Then, the humans arrived, Thexera continued. They didn't send strongly worded diplomatic protests or call for economic sanctions. They didn't form a committee to study the problem or schedule a vote for next session. They simply announced that bullying would no longer be tolerated, and then they enforced that policy. Ambassador Park stepped forward again. The Terran Federation's position is simple. We believe that technological advancement and military power come with responsibilities. The strong have an obligation to protect the weak, not exploit them. A noble sentiment, Ambassador Thara replied carefully, but who gave humans the right to make that decision for the entire galaxy? The same entity that gave the Galactic Council its authority, Ambassador Park answered without hesitation. Nobody. The difference is we're actually doing something useful with the power we've claimed. Representative Zixoth's implants flashed aggressively. You speak of responsibility, but you've destabilized the entire galactic order in a matter of weeks. The Korthak Empire may have been aggressive, but they provided stability to their region of space. Stability built on oppression isn't stability, Ambassador Park replied. It's just delayed explosion. And speaking of explosions, how many species have gone extinct while the Council debated proper procedures for intervention? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone in the assembly knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Counselor Velnesh of the Altair Alliance finally spoke. Ambassador Park, what exactly does humanity want from this council? Nothing, Ambassador Park said simply. We're not here to ask for anything. We're here to inform you of some changes in galactic policy. You cannot simply declare changes in galactic policy, Thara protested. The council represents the will of the galaxy's civilized species. Really? Ambassador Park gestured to her companions. How many of these species have voting representation on your council? How many of their concerns have been addressed in the last century? The silence was deafening. The Galactic Council's membership had been essentially static for centuries, dominated by the same handful of major powers who had founded it. We're establishing a new organization, Ambassador Park announced. The Galactic Defense Alliance. Membership is open to any species that accepts 3 basic principles. The strong protect the weak, technological advancement serves all people, and might does not make right. And if we refuse to recognize this new alliance, Representative Zixoth demanded. Ambassador Park shrugged. Then you refuse. We're not asking for your recognition. We're simply informing you that the rules have changed. Change how? Counselor Velnesh asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Any species that preys on smaller civilizations will be stopped. Any government that commits genocide will be removed. Any military force that targets civilians will be neutralized. Ambassador Park's voice remained conversational, but the words carried the weight of absolute certainty. You're talking about policing the entire galaxy, Thara said, her voice filled with disbelief. We're talking about basic decency, Ambassador Park replied, something that seems to have been in short supply around here. Over the next several hours, the assembly erupted into heated debate. Some delegates demanded immediate military action against the human threat. Others argued for diplomatic engagement. A few, mostly representing smaller civilizations, openly expressed support for humanity's intervention. Meanwhile, Ambassador Park and her companions waited patiently, occasionally providing additional details about the new alliance. The humans had already established defense pacts with over 200 minor species. Their fleet capabilities were apparently vast enough to provide meaningful protection across multiple galactic sectors simultaneously. How is this possible? Ambassador Thara finally asked during a brief recess. No single species has ever possessed the resources to police the entire galaxy. You're right, Ambassador Park agreed, which is why we're not doing it alone. The species in our alliance aren't just protected, they're contributing. The silicoids are providing advanced materials technology. The Andromedans are sharing their expertise in energy manipulation. The Zephyrians are contributing their knowledge of stellar cartography. She gestured to the diverse group around her. Humans might have provided the initial military muscle, but this alliance represents the combined efforts of hundreds of civilizations working together for mutual benefit. And if one of the major powers decides to challenge your authority, Thara pressed. Ambassador Park's expression grew serious. Ambassador, 3 days ago, the Vorthan Empire decided to test our resolve. They launched a punitive expedition against the Tau Ceti colonies, believing the humans were spread too thin to respond. She activated a holographic display showing the recent battle. The Vorthan expedition consisted of 300 heavy warships. Our response force numbered exactly 12 vessels. The holographic replay showed the brief engagement. It had lasted less than 20 minutes. The Vorthan fleet had been completely neutralized without the loss of a single human ship. The Vorthan Empire formally requested admission to our defensive alliance yesterday, Ambassador Park concluded. Their application is under review. As the day wore on, it became clear that the galaxy was facing a fundamental shift in the balance of power. The old order, dominated by the handful of species that controlled the Galactic Council, was being challenged by something entirely new. What happens to the Council? Counselor Velnesh finally asked. Nothing, assuming you start actually doing your job, Ambassador Park replied. Continue to provide forums for diplomatic engagement, facilitate trade agreements, and mediate disputes between willing participants. Just don't expect anyone to tolerate injustice while you debate proper procedures. And if we object to your interference? Ambassador Park smiled, but there was something predatory in the expression. Then you object. But understand this. The age of the strong preying on the weak with impunity is over. If you're committed to justice and mutual cooperation, you'll find us to be excellent allies. If you're committed to maintaining systems that enable oppression and exploitation. She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. As the emergency session concluded without any formal resolution, Ambassador Thara found herself walking alongside Ambassador Park toward the exit. You know, Thara said, quietly, some of us have been trying to reform the Council for decades. The major powers have always blocked meaningful change. We know, Ambassador Park replied. We've been monitoring your speeches and proposals for years. Your efforts to expand Council membership and establish intervention protocols were admirable. Then, why didn't you simply work within the existing system? Ambassador Park paused at the exit, considering the question. Tell me, Ambassador, how many more species would have gone extinct while we waited for the Council to overcome its internal politics? How many more would have suffered while the major powers protected their own interests? Thara had no answer to that question. Change is hard, Ambassador Park continued. Revolutionary change is harder. But sometimes when the system is broken beyond repair, revolution is the only path to justice. As the human delegation left the council chambers, they carried with them the knowledge that the galaxy would never be the same. The old order was crumbling, and in its place, something new was being born. Behind them, the delegates continued their heated debates, unaware that their relevance was already fading. The future belonged to those willing to fight for it, and humanity had just announced that they were prepared to do whatever was necessary to build a galaxy where might truly did make right, but only when that might was used to protect the innocent. The revolution had begun, and there was no stopping it now. 6 months had passed since humanity's dramatic entrance onto the galactic stage, and the Terran embassy on Nexus Prime hummed with constant activity. The massive space station, originally built as a neutral meeting ground for the major galactic powers, had become the unofficial headquarters of the Galactic Defense Alliance. Where once there had been empty diplomatic suites reserved for species too small to matter, now bustling offices coordinated relief efforts across dozens of star systems. Ambassador Lisa Park stood in her office overlooking the main promenade, watching the incredible diversity of beings that now called Nexus Prime home. Crystalline silicoids moved alongside gaseous nebulans in environmental suits, while aquatic Tethians glided through water-filled transport tubes overhead. The sight still amazed her, despite months of working to make it a reality. Ambassador, her aide, Lieutenant Commander Torres, appeared in the doorway with a concerned expression. We're receiving reports from the Outer Rim territories. The hegemony is mobilizing. Park turned from the window, her expression growing serious. The Draconian hegemony was the last of the major powers to openly oppose humanity's intervention in galactic affairs. Unlike the court hacks, who had relied primarily on brute force, or the Vorthans, who had eventually seen reason, the Draconians were cunning and patient. How many ships? Park asked. Intelligence suggests at least 2,000 heavy warships, plus support vessels. They're massing at the edge of hegemony space, ostensibly for defensive exercises. Park moved to her desk and activated the strategic display. The holographic map showed the current state of the galaxy, with different colors indicating various alliance memberships and neutral territories. The Draconian hegemony appeared as a large red mass on the galactic rim, one of the few remaining hostile powers. Their target? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The Arcturian Republic, Torres confirmed. 3 days ago, the Arcturians formally requested admission to our alliance. Yesterday, Draconian diplomatic vessels delivered an ultimatum demanding they withdraw their application. Park nodded grimly. The Arcturian Republic was a collection of human-like beings who had achieved spaceflight only 2 centuries ago. Their territory sat directly between the hegemony and several key trade routes that the Alliance had been working to secure. It was the perfect test case for the Draconians to challenge human authority. What's the Arcturian response? President Valdris sent a formal reply this morning, Torres said, unable to suppress a slight smile. She told the hegemony, and, I quote, the Arcturian Republic will not be intimidated by bullies, regardless of the size of their ships. We stand with our human allies and look forward to a peaceful resolution to this matter. Brave words from someone whose entire fleet wouldn't last 10 minutes against a single Draconian dreadnought, Park observed. What's our force disposition in that sector? Admiral Chun has the 3rd Fleet on patrol approximately 6 hours from Arcturian space. 47 ships, including the new Yamato-class superdreadnoughts, should be more than sufficient for anything the hegemony can throw at us. Park studied the tactical display, but something about the situation bothered her. The Draconians had observed human military capabilities for months. They had to know that open military confrontation would end badly for them. So why were they choosing this particular moment to make a stand? Commander, she said slowly, what do we know about Draconian society? I mean, really know, beyond the standard diplomatic briefings. Torres consulted his tablet. They're a rigid hierarchical society based on personal honor and martial prowess. Leadership positions are earned through combat, both literal and political. Their economy is built around expansion and conquest, with tribute from subject species forming the basis of their resource distribution. In other words, Park mused, their entire civilization depends on being seen as the dominant military power in their region. Exactly, which is why this ultimatum to the Arcturians makes sense. If they back down now, it undermines their authority with all their subject species. Park activated her secure communication system. Give me Admiral Chun. Priority 1. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Admiral Sarah Chun on the bridge of the UES Endeavor. The veteran officer looked as calm as ever, but Park could see the subtle signs of combat readiness in her posture. Admiral, Park began, I assume you've been briefed on the Draconian situation. Copy that, Ambassador. My fleet is ready to jump to Arcturian space on your order. We can be there in under 6 hours. That's not what concerns me, Park said. Admiral, the Draconians aren't stupid. They've seen what our weapons can do. So why are they picking this fight? Chin's expression grew thoughtful. You think it's a trap? I think it's something more complex than a trap. The Draconians need to maintain their reputation as the dominant military power, but they also need to survive our response. There has to be an angle we're missing. What do you recommend? Park made her decision. Take your fleet to Arcturian space as planned, but don't engage unless fired upon. I want to see what the Draconians are really up to before we respond. Understood. We'll maintain defensive posture unless directly threatened. 2 days later, the confrontation everyone had been expecting finally materialized. The Draconian fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Arcturian system in a display of military precision that would have been impressive under other circumstances. 2,000 massive warships arranged in perfect attack formations, their weapons powered and shields raised. Admiral Chen's Third Fleet was waiting for them. The sight that greeted the Draconian commanders was unlike anything they had prepared for. The human fleet had positioned itself in a protective formation around the inhabited worlds of the Arcturian system. But they weren't alone. Ships from dozens of Alliance species had joined them, creating a defensive network that spanned the entire star system. Silicoid crystal ships that could channel and redirect energy beams. Nebula cruisers that existed partially in subspace, making them nearly impossible to target. Andromedan vessels that seemed to bend light around themselves, creating gravitational anomalies that disrupted targeting systems. This is Fleet Commander Grakneth of the Draconian Hegemony, came the transmission from the lead Draconian vessel. Human forces are ordered to withdraw immediately. This system falls within Draconian sphere of influence and will be claimed by right of conquest. Admiral Chen's reply was broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. The Arcturian Republic has requested our protection, which we are legally bound to provide under the mutual defense provisions of the Galactic Defense Alliance. Your forces are ordered to withdraw beyond the heliopause immediately. The hegemony does not recognize the authority of your so-called alliance. Grakneth responded. We have conquered 100 worlds and enslaved a dozen species. We will not be deterred by a handful of newcomers playing at galactic politics. What happened next surprised everyone, including Admiral Chen. Instead of opening fire, the Draconian fleet simply waited. They maintained their threatening position, but made no aggressive moves beyond charging their weapons. Admiral, her tactical officer reported, the Draconians are broadcasting on multiple frequencies. They appear to be trying to establish communication with their subject species throughout the region. Chen realized what was happening. They're not here to fight us. They're here to demonstrate their power to their own people. This whole confrontation is political theater. The standoff continued for 18 hours, with both fleets maintaining defensive positions while diplomatic channels buzzed with activity. Behind the scenes, Alliance negotiators worked frantically to find a peaceful resolution that would allow the Draconians to save face while protecting the Arcturians. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the Alliance's chief xenopsychologist, had been analyzing Draconian cultural patterns and made a crucial discovery. Ambassador, she explained to Park via Secure Channel, Draconian society has a concept called Korthag, roughly translated as honorable withdrawal. If a warrior faces an opponent so superior that continued combat would be suicide, they can withdraw without losing honor, provided they acknowledge their opponent's strength publicly. How does that help us? Park asked. We offer them a way out. A formal recognition of human military superiority in exchange for their withdrawal and a non-aggression pact. It was a delicate negotiation that took another 12 hours to arrange. In the end, Fleet Commander Grakneth broadcast a message that would be remembered throughout Draconian space for generations. Warriors of the hegemony, his voice carried across multiple star systems. We have encountered a foe whose technological mastery exceeds our own. The humans and their allies possess weapons and defenses that render traditional warfare obsolete. In accordance with the ancient code of Korthag, we acknowledge their superiority and withdraw from this contested space. The Draconian fleet departed as precisely as it had arrived, but the political ramifications of the confrontation echoed throughout the galaxy. Word spread that even the mighty Draconian hegemony had been forced to acknowledge human supremacy. More importantly, the standoff had demonstrated something that pure military victory could not have achieved. The alliance was not just about human power. It was about unity among diverse species working together for mutual protection. The Draconians played this perfectly, Park admitted to her staff during the post-incident briefing. They maintained their honor by acknowledging a superior foe, avoided a devastating military defeat, and probably bought themselves time to modernize their technology. And we got what we wanted, Torres pointed out. The Arcturians are safe, and we've demonstrated that the Alliance can protect its members without resorting to unnecessary violence. Park nodded, but she knew this victory came with complications. The Draconian withdrawal had been peaceful, but it had also been pragmatic. They would be back, eventually, with better preparation and possibly new allies. "What's the status of hegemony subject species?" she asked. "Interesting developments there," Dr. Tanaka reported. 17 different species within hegemony space have sent discreet diplomatic inquiries about potential alliance membership. They were apparently very impressed by our restraint during the confrontation. Restraint. The fact that we didn't pursue and destroy the Draconian fleet when we clearly had the capability. In hegemony space, that kind of mercy is almost unknown. It's being interpreted as a sign of strength, not weakness. Over the following weeks, the Alliance found itself dealing with a new challenge: success. Applications for membership were pouring in from across the galaxy. The old order was crumbling not through military conquest, but through the simple demonstration that there was a better way to organize galactic society. The Centauran Federation formally applied for associate membership, along with most of the Rigel Collective's member species. Even some of the more progressive voices within the Galactic Council were beginning to advocate for cooperation with the Alliance rather than opposition. "We're reaching a tipping point," Park observed during a strategy meeting with the Alliance Leadership Council. "At this rate, the old Galactic Council will be irrelevant within a year." "Is that necessarily a bad thing?" asked Captain Thexura, who now served as the Alliance's Director of Colonial Affairs. "The Council has spent centuries maintaining a status quo that benefits the few at the expense of the many. The question," added Dr. Tanaka, "is what we replace it with. We're essentially rebuilding galactic civilization from the ground up. The decisions we make now will affect billions of beings for generations to come." Park stood and walked to the main viewing port, looking out at the incredible diversity of ships and beings that now called Nexus Prime home. Humanity had come to the galaxy expecting to find advanced civilizations that could teach them wisdom and guide them toward a better future. Instead, they had found a broken system that nobody seemed willing or able to fix. "Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needed," she said quietly. "Not wisdom from ancient civilizations, but fresh perspective from newcomers who haven't learned that change is impossible." The revolution was no longer just about military intervention or protecting the weak. It had become something larger, a fundamental reimagining of what galactic civilization could become. And at the center of it all stood humanity, the species that had looked at injustice and said simply, "This ends now." The old galaxy was dying, but something better was being born to take its place. 2 years after humanity's first intervention in the Kepler 442 system, the galaxy had transformed beyond all recognition. The former Galactic Council building on Nexus Prime now served as the headquarters of the Galactic Defense Alliance, its once empty chambers filled with representatives from over 400 species. Where bureaucratic inaction had once reigned supreme, coordinated relief efforts and rapid response teams now operated across dozens of sectors simultaneously. President Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation stood in the Alliance's main assembly hall, preparing to address the largest gathering of sentient species in galactic history. The hall itself had been redesigned to accommodate the incredible diversity of beings now working together. Atmospheric zones for gas-breathing species, low-gravity sections for delicate crystalline beings, and specialized translation matrices that could handle everything from chemical pheromones to quantum entanglement communication. "Distinguished representatives," President Vasquez began, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber through adaptive translation systems. 2 years ago, humanity took its first tentative steps onto the galactic stage. We came not as conquerors, but as neighbors seeking to join a community we believed would welcome peaceful cooperation and mutual advancement. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The transformation had not been without its challenges, but the results spoke for themselves. Galactic trade had increased by 300%. Scientific advancement had accelerated exponentially as species shared knowledge freely. Most importantly, not a single civilization had faced extinction or forced subjugation since the Alliance's formation. What we found instead, the president continued, was a galaxy paralyzed by fear, where the strong preyed upon the weak while institutions designed to protect justice served only to maintain an unjust status quo. We decided that this state of affairs was unacceptable. In the audience, Captain Thexera listened with mixed emotions. Her own people, the Zephyrians, now thrived in their new colony system under Alliance protection. Their population had grown by 40% as refugees from across the galaxy sought shelter in Alliance space. But she remembered the desperation of those early days, when death had seemed inevitable and no one had answered their calls for help. Today, President Vasquez announced, "We gather not to celebrate military victories or territorial conquests, but to mark the establishment of something unprecedented in galactic history, a true interspecies democracy based on the principle that all sentient life has inherent value and dignity." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives from hundreds of worlds rose to their feet, creating a symphony of applause, harmonic resonance, and biochemical releases that expressed approval in dozens of different ways. Admiral Sarah Chun, now serving as the Alliance's supreme military commander, watched the proceedings from the military section with quiet satisfaction. The Third Fleet had recently returned from the Outer Spiral, where they had successfully mediated a territorial dispute between the Methane Collective and the Silicon-based architects. What had once been resolved through centuries of bloody warfare was now settled through negotiation and mutual compromise in a matter of weeks. The Alliance Charter we formally adopt today, President Vasquez continued, enshrines 5 fundamental principles that will guide our civilization forward. First, the right of all sentient beings to life and liberty. Second, the obligation of advanced civilizations to protect and aid developing ones. Third, the peaceful resolution of disputes through dialogue and mediation. Fourth, the free exchange of knowledge and technology for the benefit of all. And fifth, the collective defense of these principles against any force that would undermine them. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now the Alliance's Director of Xenocultural Studies, had spent months working with representatives from every member species to draft the charter. The document represented compromises and negotiations across radically different philosophical frameworks, but somehow they had managed to create something that every civilization could embrace. Not everyone in the galaxy had joined the Alliance, of course. The Draconian hegemony maintained its independence, though they had signed a comprehensive non-aggression pact and had begun cautious cultural exchanges. The remnants of the old Galactic Council still met occasionally, but their membership had dwindled to fewer than a dozen species, and their influence was negligible. The challenges ahead of us are significant, President Vasquez acknowledged. We must explore new frontiers while respecting the rights of any life we encounter. We must advance technologically while ensuring that progress serves all beings, not just the privileged few. Most importantly, we must remain vigilant against the forces of oppression and injustice that still exist in dark corners of the galaxy. Ambassador Lisa Park, now serving as the Alliance's Secretary General, thought about the intelligence reports crossing her desk daily. The Omega Syndicate, a criminal organization that trafficked in sentient beings, still operated in lawless regions beyond Alliance space. The Void Cult, a fanatical religious sect that believed all organic life should be eliminated, had recently acquired advanced weapons technology from unknown sources. The galaxy was safer than it had ever been, but it was not yet safe for everyone. But I have seen what we can accomplish when we work together, President Vasquez said, her voice growing stronger. I have seen former enemies become allies, ancient grudges overcome by mutual understanding, and impossible problems solved through cooperation and creativity. The president gestured to a section of the assembly where some of the most unlikely partnerships in galactic history sat together. Representatives of the Andromedan free colonies worked alongside former Korthak military officers who had chosen exile over continued service to their fallen empire. Silicoid crystal beings collaborated with energy-based plasma entities on research projects that would have been inconceivable just years earlier. Humanity did not create this transformation alone, President Vasquez emphasized. Every species in this assembly contributed something essential to our success. The Zephyrians provided stellar cartography that revolutionized our navigation systems. The Andromedans shared energy manipulation techniques that made our ships 3 times more efficient. The Nebulans taught us communication methods that transcend language barriers entirely. Captain Thexera felt tears forming in her secondary eyes as she remembered the early days of the Alliance. Humans had saved her people from extinction, but they had never made the Zephyrians feel like junior partners or charity cases. Instead, they had immediately sought ways to incorporate Zephyrian knowledge and culture into the growing Alliance structure. As we move forward into an uncertain future, the President continued, we do so with the knowledge that no single species has all the answers, but together we are capable of overcoming any challenge the universe presents. The formal adoption of the Alliance Charter was followed by a celebration that lasted for 3 days. Cultural performances from hundreds of worlds, scientific demonstrations of breakthrough technologies, and art installations that reflected the incredible creativity of galactic civilization filled every public space on Nexus Prime. But perhaps the most significant moment came during a quiet ceremony in the Alliance Memorial Garden. President Vasquez, accompanied by representatives from every founding member species, unveiled a simple monument dedicated to all the beings who had suffered under the old system of galactic governance. The memorial was elegant in its simplicity, a sphere of crystallized spacetime that contained images and memories from every species that had faced extinction, enslavement, or abandonment before the Alliance's formation. Names scrolled endlessly through its surface, billions of beings whose sacrifice had made the current peace possible. We remember, President Vasquez said softly, not to dwell on past pain, but to ensure that such suffering never happens again. Standing beside the memorial, Ambassador Park reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Humanity had entered the galaxy with good intentions, but limited understanding. They had made mistakes, misjudged situations, and sometimes acted with more force than necessary. But they had never wavered from their central conviction that might should serve right, not the other way around. The hardest part is just beginning, Admiral Chen observed quietly. It's one thing to tear down a broken system. It's another thing entirely to build something better that will last for generations. Dr. Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. We're essentially conducting the largest social experiment in galactic history. We're trying to create a civilization that works for beings with radically different biologies, psychologies, and cultural frameworks. The fact that it's worked so far is almost miraculous. Maybe that's the key, President Vasquez suggested. We approached it as an experiment rather than a crusade. We remained open to changing our methods when they didn't work, and we listened to our partners rather than imposing our own solutions. Over the following months, the Alliance continued to evolve and grow. New technologies emerged from cross-species collaboration that would have taken centuries for any single civilization to develop independently. Artistic and cultural movements spread across the galaxy, creating new forms of beauty that reflected the diversity of Alliance membership. The economic benefits were equally dramatic. With the elimination of territorial conflicts and the establishment of common defense, resources that had been devoted to military buildup could be redirected toward research, exploration, and improving quality of life. Standards of living rose across Alliance space as knowledge and technology flowed freely between civilizations. But perhaps the most important transformation was psychological. For the first time in galactic history, developing civilizations could reach for the stars without fear of conquest or exploitation. Young beings across hundreds of worlds looked to the future with hope rather than dread, knowing that they lived in a galaxy where cooperation was stronger than conflict. The Alliance faced its first major external test 3 years after its founding, when long-range sensors detected something unprecedented, a massive fleet of completely unknown ships approaching from extragalactic space. The vessels used technologies that defied understanding and moved at velocities that should have been impossible. First contact protocol, Admiral Chun announced calmly as her fleets moved to intercept positions. all weapons powered, but not targeted. Standard peaceful greeting on all frequencies. The response that came back challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. The extragalactic visitors were not conquerors or explorers. They were refugees, fleeing something so terrible that they had abandoned their entire galaxy rather than face it. The hunger comes, their leader explained through translation matrices that struggled with concepts beyond normal language. It consumes not just matter and energy, but possibility itself. We escape to warn others, to seek allies in the defense of all that exists. President Vasquez listened to the briefing with growing alarm. These beings, calling themselves the Exodus Fleet, possessed technology that made even human capabilities look primitive. If they were fleeing from something, that something represented a threat beyond imagination. "How long do we have?" she asked the Exodus Fleet's representative. "Time moves differently for the hunger," came the reply. "But, based on our calculations, it will breach the galactic barrier within 50 of your standard years. Perhaps less." The Alliance faced its ultimate test. Everything they had built, every principle they had established, every hope they had fostered would be meaningless if the galaxy itself ceased to exist. But, as President Vasquez looked around the emergency assembly at the hundreds of species represented, she felt something that surprised her. Confidence. "We've faced the impossible before," she said quietly to her advisors. "We turned a galaxy of scattered, suspicious civilizations into a unified alliance. We replaced centuries of conflict with cooperation. If anyone can find a way to defend against this threat, it's us." Admiral Chen nodded grimly. "We'll need every ship, every technology, every brilliant mind in the galaxy. This isn't about alliance versus non-alliance anymore. This is about existence versus extinction." "Then, we make it work," President Vasquez replied with the quiet determination that had carried humanity from a single world to galactic leadership. "We got 50 years to unite an entire galaxy and develop defenses against something that destroyed a civilization more advanced than our own. It won't be easy, but then, again, nothing worthwhile ever is." The age of galactic unity had begun, but its ultimate test still lay ahead. Somewhere in the dark between galaxies, an ancient evil stirred, drawn by the light of civilizations it sought to consume. But this time, it would not face scattered, frightened prey. This time, it would face humanity and their allies, united in purpose and determined to prove that in a universe full of darkness, the light would always find a way to shine. The story of the galaxy's transformation was complete, but the story of its survival was just beginning. And at its heart stood the principle that had started it all. When someone calls for help, you answer. No matter the odds, no matter the cost, no matter how impossible the situation might seem. Because that's what good neighbors do.